without wasting much time, I'd like to welcome you to this session this morning, where we're talking about planning for inclusion in East Africa's informal settlements. And when we talk about inclusion, well, we are thinking about how to ensure that everyone is living full lives and how we're learning to live together in very difficult circumstances. We're talking about leaving no one behind, as with the, which I think is currently the theme for the Sustainable Development Goals. We're talking about informal settlements that house the poorest of us in this region. We're talking about the minorities within this already disadvantaged groups. Yesterday we had a lot of conversations about women and about sexual and gender minorities and how they are protected within urban spaces. We hope to have a lively discussion this morning about how to plan for inclusion. What would be very useful for me, I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Citizens Participation in the African Union, which is a civil society organization that encourages other African NGOs to engage in continental policy-making spaces. And so what would be useful, what I hope to take from this session, would be how the bulk of research that I've been listening to all of yesterday, and we'll hear more of this morning, the work that we're doing on the ground, how does that translate to the policy-making spaces? How does that translate to the people who are making decisions at national, regional, and continental levels? There are already legal frameworks in places, treaties and laws. The continental level, you have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Just yesterday, the African Court on Human and People's Rights was having to determine whether or not extreme systemic and widespread poverty was a violation of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. You have the African Charter on Democracy, Elections, and Governance that buttresses very effectively the need for citizen participation in decision-making spaces. So how do we make this link between research, policy, and advocacy is what I hope that I will take away, not just from this session, but from the discussions that we will be having at this conference. Perhaps without further ado, my panel has been introduced. I would probably want to talk a bit, talk to my panel now. I think I've spoken enough myself. Maybe it would be easier actually if I did a bit more of an introduction so that we know who is who. I know they were mentioned before everybody came up on stage. My understanding is that Humphrey Otieno is replacing Patrick. Maybe, right, that's Humphrey. And then we have Wangoi Kimari, okay, and Darshini Mahadevia. Mahadevia, okay. Humphrey, I believe you're from the City Council Urban Planning Department. You're most welcome. Wangoi here is from the Social Justice Center, doing work in one of the informal settlements in Kenya called Makuru. Mathare. Oh, okay, so it's not Makuru. Sorry, apologies. And Darshini is from the CEPT University based in India. In Ahmedabad, okay, in Ahmedabad in India. So thank you to my panel. Thank you for being here this morning, and we look forward to hearing your about your work. Wangoi, Koi. Okay, I can call you Koi. Okay, super. So Koi, maybe if I could hear a little bit about the work that you're doing in Mathare with the Social Justice Center.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I hope this finds you well. So my name, as has been mentioned, is Wangoi Kimari, and I'm part of a community-based organization called Mathare Social Justice Center. So Mathare, just as a brief introduction, is a poor urban settlement in Nairobi that has been in existence from about 1921. It used to be a quarry settlement and has since then taken on conditions that I guess are reflective of what we call slums. There's not enough, there are not enough sanitation facilities, there's no access to clean water, houses are temporary, and lots of residents are fighting to keep a hold of their land. And there's lots of forced eviction by the council. Maybe Humphrey can talk about that later. And so these are the conditions that residents are facing, and this is the third generation of residents who are living there. And so Mathare Social Justice Center came together in 2015, and it's composed of a variety of, or a number of community activists and also maybe middle-class allies like myself, to address a lot of issues that, particularly the issues that are not attended to by larger organizations or the city council. And our initial mandate was to document extrajudicial killings. And as you can see from a report that I put on your table, it's a participatory action research report that was conducted by residents, because in some ways, these extrajudicial killings by the police are part of an informal urban policy to, from our understanding, continuously entrench colonial logics of the city, because Nairobi is still governed by very colonial logics that have, in this neoliberal period, are accompanying consistent neglect with force. So this participatory action research report, which in the initial pages talks about the larger conditions of Mathare, is also trying to indicate some of what has become informal urban governance, and that's a lot of police surveillance of young people, a lot of police brutality, and unfortunately also extrajudicial killings. So for us, and maybe I'll tie this into the theme of the panel, for us, in order for there to be a more just city, not just an inclusive, but a more just city, we need to really interrogate some of the logics that reproduce this city. So how is this city, what are the informal and formal ways in which, especially poor people who are 70% of city residents who live on 6% of the land, how do they experience this city? So they experience it not just through a lack of water, but they also experience urban governance through these informal urban practices like killings by the police. And so although we focus primarily on extrajudicial killings, we're contextualizing this in larger neglect, the larger neglect of 70% of the residents of Nairobi. So I think that's a small introduction.
Thank you very much, Koi. I mean, you raised some really critical issues, talking about colonial legacies, which means we have not rethought how we run the city or how we plan the city. You've talked about consistent neglect, which is buttressed with force. And most importantly for me, you've spoken about inclusion being also about justice. And really looking at how the largest number of people in this city experience this city. Maybe Humphrey, I can bring you in at this point. What does it look like from the city council point of view?
Okay, morning everyone. My name is Humphrey Otieno, as already been mentioned, from the Safer Nairobi Initiative, which is a project for Nairobi City County together with UN Habitat, looking at urban safety from a planning point of view. Basically, just to ride into what I've been asked, I think, yes, we agree that there has been a consistent what I can say, consistent, not neglect, but because it's not intentional, leaving out people from the informal settlement. And as she as well said, Koi has already said, is almost 70% of the population of Nairobi live in informal settlement. So Mathare just being one of the areas that she has, they are working on. I think from the county perspective, it has not been a systematic approach in terms of neglect of this area. And one challenge that we have been facing, especially when it comes to Mathare, this was an Air Force kind of land. So it was not part of the county, and as she as well said, that it was a quarry. So which means these were areas where the armed forces actually used to get most of their soils to work on the Air Force, which is on just across the road in terms of their roads infrastructure in that particular area. And then during the colony, some of the few, can I call them our freedom fighters, ended up starting to stay in that particular area. And they metamorphosized and the population has grown. So this is something that has not been addressed for quite a very long time. But with regard to issue of the right to citizen and justice, I think the county has tried its best in terms of addressing the issue of housing in that particular area. And one of the intervention, especially in Mathare 4A, and Koi knows, the then Nairobi City Council worked together with a German organization to try and uplift the living standard of people in Mathare 4A. And if you walk there today, you'll find very adequate houses that were then constructed. But as I said, with the urban decay and rural-urban immigration, the population has grown in that area, and I think it has surpassed the capacity of the council with regard to issue of housing. But let me also say that the county has, the city council then has been struggling, especially in addressing issues of housing in general, and not only as a council, but also as a government of Kenya, because we know that the last housing projects that were done in Nairobi were actually in 1978, 79, and early 80s. And this is where areas like Buruburu, the Umoja were done. So since then, we haven't been developing social housing for that matter. And this has seen the population grow. As you are aware, Nairobi used to be a very small area up to Outer Ring, for those who are aware of Nairobi. But now the population has grown all the way to now Mihango and almost close to Machakos. So the population has grown. We have a deficit of up to about 450,000 housing units in Nairobi. So it's not only Mathare, but it's a bigger problem than just Mathare. With regard, so one of the cognizance by the county is that, as she has already alluded, that eviction used to be one of the major threats to these informal settlements or slums. But with the promulgation of the new constitution in 2010, Article 43 is very clear on issue of the right to the housing. And so ever since, the issues to do with eviction has, there's a moratorium in terms of doing any other eviction, and the county is trying through the urban renewal to try and develop more housing units so that it can house its citizen. With regard to extrajudicial killing, I'm very sorry that this is happening at a very wide scale. and especially for young people. But we know that there is a challenge with regard to dealing with the population, especially the youth. And issues of, it's not just, it goes beyond just addressing of young people, but it's a whole family fabric issue. And I think this is a discussion we need to take even further and begin to look at what are some of the challenges that we are facing as a society, because it's a society problem. We have challenges with regard to issues of education. You know, up to a certain level, perhaps the only level that young people can go to is up to primary level. And then when it comes to secondary level, there begins some other more challenges with regard to going to upper secondary and even university. So most of the young people have not been able to venture into that particular area. So we have a large number of school dropouts, and we have also issues to do with the family fabric. You get people divorcing and such like, or orphans and vulnerable. So all this encompasses the whole challenge and the rider, perhaps why we find most of our youth engaging in crime and such like. But as a county, we have tried our best also to try and work with young people. We established a one-stop youth center, which has been working with young people to try and help them through vocational trainings and such like, and make referrals. Yesterday, I hope the former mayor, I can see him, is already there. He's been trying, actually, we established a program which was try to work with young people who have been in conflict with the law and try and bring them back to the society. But you know our society, it's not easy once somebody was already a criminal to be easily accepted back into the community. So these are programs that we have been trying to roll out there as a county, but there are other major challenges. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. I can't imagine that your work could be easy, planning with all the difficult scenario, or with the difficult scenario that you have mapped out. It seems that not only is it a problem that has grown out of control, it also has interlinkages with other issues that you have raised. Perhaps a follow-up question would, for me, which would be, where do we go from here? Because clearly, what I think the definition that people say of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So how do we change this paradigm? How do we change this dynamic so that, as you say, the largest number of Nairobi's people, and you're talking about a 450,000 deficit in housing. This is a massive issue. And so it would be interesting to hear how the council plans to do things differently. But maybe before we go there, I may call in or turn to Dashini. You have had more than 2.5 decades of experience in public policy, development, urbanization, and talking about issues of sustainability. So maybe you can come in with some wisdom or some experiences from your own context on how do we deal with these governance deficits that see people in informal settlements struggling to survive.
Thank you. Oh, you already made me feel old by saying 2.5 decades of experience. But I must say that as you, with longer the experience, sometimes you become more cynical and give up sometimes on the possibilities of a change. I'm very happy to hear this debate between somebody from my left and somebody from my right. We constantly have been witness to this debate in Indian context, which are sort of reducing these days, unfortunately, of having a dialogue at the local level between the community-based organizations and the local government. Two things I want to say, something that I've been saying since last 2 days is, and it comes out of our experience in India, is that when slum redevelopment or housing rights for the slum dwellers or urban poor is being talked about, the main barrier that we find in the Indian context is the land issue. I've been saying this since yesterday, but I cannot get over it because this is what we have been struggling to deal with. And given the term high economic growth sort of policy drive at the national level and the competition among the states for attaining high economic growth, construction has become an extremely important sector, and real estate in development has become very important sector. And hence there's been much stronger tendency to what is happening is speculative profits from the land markets through real estate development. And some of the city governments and their development authorities, as in case of Mumbai, from where Amita comes from, there is a Mumbai Metropolitan Regional Development Authorities whose sole purpose is to speculate on land and create a large infrastructure fund using land as a resource. Many other cities have begun to do that. So what we are seeing in Indian context is that there is a resistance from the local governments to give away lands. It could be on lease basis for use purposes to slum communities for redevelopment. And especially the lands that are on prime locations, it's where the evictions are occurring of the slums that are there. So that is one issue that has to be settled. At the national level, earlier we had a very large program which was so good that it got scuttled in its infancy, called Rajiv Awas Yojana, where there was the main thrust was not to evict the slum dwellers, but redevelop them on the existing sites, because all the slums have their logic of location, that most of the slums come up near employment centers. So to evict them and push them into resettlement sites away from their existing employment centers would mean loss of livelihoods and households sliding into poverty. So that was a program, that was the philosophy of that program, which had come up through active civil society advocacy groups at the national level, research that was funded by the national government itself, and finally one reached this program. It was in place for 1 or 2 years, and then it just got abandoned for a new program, which is the second barrier, is that housing is being seen as a construction project. And housing is not being seen as a community development activity. It's not being seen as a process, but it's been seen as a product, that things have to be produced. You can have beautiful, glossy brochures of new affordable housing programs. You could flag them at the international level, but is it for the poor, residents of the slums is a big question mark. So there is that shift. That is one thing is related to land and construction and profits from them being very important for national GDP figures. So that is at a macroeconomic level. But just local level, when redevelopment have to be taken up if we had slum redevelopment programs and a policy of not displacing slums and redeveloping them on C2, then there are multiple issues that need to be resolved. Once again, the issue of land comes in, because it's not necessarily that the lands on which slums have come up are public lands. They don't belong necessarily to the local government, or in Indian case, state government, here provincial government or the national government. It may be private sector lands or belonging to private individuals. And to be able to resolve land tenure issue, and that requires much more longer process of negotiation with private owners. There has to be also negotiations with authorities of higher level, that is state government land has been encroached upon, then the local government has to have a negotiation with the state government. If it is the national government land, even then there has to be a negotiation. For example, a lot of railway lands are encroached upon for slums. Railways are not willing to give up, and rightly so, those lands, because this could be used for expansion, railway expansion programs. Then what do we do with slums that are located on such lands? The case study that we have taken up in SAIC project of Guwahati city, 40% of lands in the slums in that city are on railway lands. And so what is the answer to the question of land? Even if we were to assume that we are going to have a tenure regularization policy and in situ redevelopment, one needs to build the answer to that from case-by-case basis, which is a very tedious and long-drawn process. It is sometimes impossible to do it at the city level. Sometimes it may be a very time-consuming process to identify who owns the land and what are the multiple stakeholders on that piece of land. But nonetheless, that exercise has to be done, and that needs to be done at a decentralized level with the community participation. The second issue that comes in situ redevelopment, if it were to be done, is that who are the residents of the slum? How do you define what is a household? At least in Indian context, I could say that household is not a nuclear household. It is often joint families with multiple generations living together. And so when a new housing program has to be done, how do you define a household? If it has to be redevelopment into a multi-story apartment, which tend to be very small in Indian context, it's like 300 square feet housing, then you can't put a household with 10 to 12 members, which is a joint family with multiple married couples inside, into one in 300 square feet apartment. And so there is a resistance from that side because it's not socially suitable to move into a housing that I think you're talking about, a constructed house which is 300 square feet, 400 square feet, whatever the norms are. And so it's not socially suitable to move into this unless one does a process, but in that case, who is going to pay for it? How many households are going to be enumerated in the existing situation, etc. These are all issues which are very, very complicated, and one would encounter them if one were to do redevelopment on the site. And often the governments are in a great hurry to accomplish a project because it's finally a construction project, and there is very little time left for this kind of processes. And so this is what we have learned in Indian context. And so we realize that we know that there is in situ redevelopment, tenure regularization, and housing as a process is what is the way we should move forward, but it requires long-drawn processes at the local level, and we need many community-based organizations to be available to take up such a process. And that's where I a bit empathize with you, if from the local government, that even if there are intentions, it does get a bit more complex.
Darshini, you've raised, I think, one of the key challenges demonstrated quite succinctly the political economy of the challenges that we're talking about with informal settlements. It's important for us to understand the money dynamics that perpetuate these situations, and more importantly, to understand the communities, who they are, and what their actual needs are. And maybe I can come back to you, Koi, for that question. With the communities that you work with, what do they consider as being the solutions? What do they consider, what do they see as being inclusion and justice?
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Is this working? Thank you. I think it's important to recognize that this is a community that lives really abutting a superhighway that was built in 2 years, but they've lived there for 100 years and don't have even basic toilets. So I think that really reflects, if a 42-kilometer highway can be built in 2 years, but not one house for a single mother, I think that reflects kind of the lack of priority of the county government in addressing these long-term systematic issues. And that is also reflective in the new plan, which is the the new master plan for Nairobi, where you barely see one person in that plan or in the Nairobi Metropolitan Vision, which I think is from 2008, where you don't see people in the plan. It's a very technocratic offering to Nairobi residents, who are 4 million. And it's a plan that can make an offering as definitive as having a Nairobi Symphonic Orchestra, but won't talk about the number of toilets that people need. There's no enumeration of how many people are lacking basic water supplies, how many people need toilets. So I think just to put that there, I mean, it's important to look at, even if there's not a stated neglect, it's very evident in these technocratic plans that are offered to residents. And I think what's really important for residents, not to, I mean, I don't live in Mathare. My work has mostly been to support community and to learn also community processes, but also in my own PhD work, I historicize the city of Nairobi, and it becomes very evident that the plan for a railway town from 1898 to 1899, the plan in 1913, 1927, 1948, 1971, they're still very evident and are still echoed in this 2014 plan. I mean, the tenor is fairly similar because there's not a bid to address some of the ways in which the city is reproduced. Instead, we're offered, especially now, a very global or world city narrative without reflecting, again, on how people experience the city. So I think it's very important to prioritize basic rights. I'm not saying that I don't deny that, of course, there are issues to do with the public purse. That's obviously an important consideration. But to prioritize basic rights in these plans instead of a symphony for Nairobi. To also think about participation in not such neoliberal terms. This new plan that was released in 2014 has as one of its most central tropes the idea that it was participatory. But if you are here for those consultations, you will see that, and if you participated in them, that residents were just invited to a plan that was already prescribed. And if you even look at the appendix of the new plan, those ideas that were offered in these meetings come as an appendix but don't seem to have any bearing on the plan itself. So it's important to prioritize basic rights, to include people in a manner that is actual participation and reflects indigenous participatory processes and also people's perspectives instead of just a co-opted neoliberal kind of participation. To move away from technocratic frameworks, from these world city aspirations that forget that people live in a city, and also to recognize, I'm also I would emphasize very emphatically, land rights, to support people's land rights and their right to live where they've been for 100 years, but also to respect the way in which they have been incrementally shaping the city to benefit them. The county hasn't been there. Really, I mean, I know that there are many things involved, but the county has not been there. So also to respect the ways in which they have shaped their landscape to benefit themselves and their community, and to offer support for these processes. That's, I think, in many of the conversations I've had over 10 years in Mathare, I just captured them through these few points. But this is what people want: land rights, because if you don't have right to your land, that provides conditions for violence from the police. You're not able to improve your landscape. You're not able to find ways to, the county will not give you a water supply if you don't have the rights to that land. From my understanding, maybe maybe there are other considerations, but land rights are also very important. So, thank you.
Thank you, Koi. I mean, you have sort of drilled down to one of the core issues, that people aren't at the center of the development plans in the city or for the city, and that we're more about. Did you say an orchestra?
Yes.
Okay. It just seems a bit out of this world that we have a 450,000 social housing deficit, and we're talking about an orchestra as a prioritization for the city plan. And you've also spoken about a key issue around participation and what does it mean, and how do we ensure that there is real and actual participation and not just the endorsement of an orchestra. I can't get over that. So maybe if I can go back to Humphrey, sorry. So at some point you spoke about housing having been built with the support of a German foundation. And I'm just wondering, what are our own Kenyan solutions to these issues? What are the budgetary allocations for dealing with informal settlements? And how much political will is there to resolve these issues?
Thank you very much. I think with regard to how we want to change the paradigm in Nairobi City County, there are a number of interventions that so far have been put in place. So first of all, just to say that the projects and most of the housing projects that have been happening in Nairobi, coming from California, going to Umoja, Buruburu, actually most of them have been funded by external funding, DFID, French development, USAID. So we've been having a challenge from the inner side, or from internally, yeah? That is from the Ministry of Housing, when they used to be in charge of the housing before it was devolved to the counties. And what I can say is that what we have been rallying and actually trying to promote in the national housing law or legislation is if we can secure like 5% of the budget to go directly for social housing as a direct input by the Treasury, so that it's already anchored in the law that on an annual basis, when we are having the budget being read, we'll be knowing that 5% of that will be going to social housing. So that is one of the intervention. The other intervention that has been happening from the national government is there has been the slum upgrading project, which started in the decanting side of Soweto East. For those who are aware of the decanting site, the project is ongoing. And so far we have quite a number of units that have already been developed. And it's not only happening in Nairobi, but it's happening simultaneously in other towns and cities also. So Mombasa, Kisumu have also been benefiting from this. That is from the national housing. At the county of Nairobi, to be specific, the urban renewal project, which has been facing a lot of court cases, injunctions and stuff, is one of the, if I may say, political goodwill from the county side with regard to renewing the old county estates and give them a facelift, so that we can house as many people as possible. Because if you visit some of those housing estates, they have inadequate land within them, which we can still do new houses, and still we will house the already people who are existing in those neighborhoods, but also bring other new people coming from informal settlement, so that also they can have their stake. We are saying this Nairobi belongs to all of us. And the only way we can do it is to try and accommodate each other. But we have been facing a lot of court cases and injunctions and revolt, even in places where actually the resident participated in a very participatory way in terms of moving forward the project. So, of course, it's a political issue at some sense, because politicians from either sides of the political parties will want to undo each other. And that has been one of the challenges we have been facing administratively in terms of implementing this project. So if you ask about the goodwill from the county, yes, there is a goodwill. If we are ready to roll out, yes, even the consultant is supposed to be actually on the ground. And the designs already, everything is already there. And there have been public participation, consultation in a number of, I don't know even how many. But as we know, we are human beings. Today, people will even deny being in those consultation meetings while we already have even evidence showing that they actually participated in those kind of forums. So I think from the county's perspective, in trying to address this deficit, we are actually on course in terms of trying to address them. But let me also indulge on issues of public participation. Because that is one of the main topic of this discussion. I think engagement of the public or community in that sense is now a constitutional right in Kenya. Article 10 is very clear in terms of how people need to participate. To go even further, we have the County Government Act. The County Government Act is very clear, yeah, and it has a whole chapter on public participation. So the county is not ignoring all this. And then even further, Nairobi County just the other day adopted a community participation bill, a Community Participation Act, so which is a law. So even our county officers, they are very much aware that you can't go into you can't begin doing a project without consulting. That is something that is already a requirement in the law. So all the projects that we are undertaking, we ensure that there is public participation. The second level, and with regard to informal settlement, you remember in the in late 1990s, early 2000, we had massive eviction plans. But all these eviction plans were put into hold. Why? Because the county realized that though informal settlement were not within their jurisdiction or areas of operation, they realized also these people are human beings just as other people, and they deserve services. So what did we do? We adopted an approach for incremental slum upgrading project. Instead of doing mega project, we started doing it slow by slow. And what did we do? We begin by starting with the very basic services. Water, bringing in water. And if you ask Nairobi Sewer and Water Company, they'll tell you all the informal settlement have actually been connected with water. And we have even given some kiosks, yeah, or a water selling point to specific people, individuals. And to some extent, people have also been asked to apply so that they can connect water directly to their houses. So this is already happening. With regard to issue of trying to open the informal settlement, we have done a number of roads. Mathare have just recently, I think last year or something, we opened a new road that is passing inside Mathare. And it is connecting people, because you know people have to be connected, yeah, as they go to work, and also in case of disaster and the issue of safety and security, and especially for if women want to deliver or something like that. So we have tried to do that, but it's not easy working in informal settlement. You have to do a number of consultation. You have to agree with the community. It is an all consensus building, because even just opening that area, you have to relocate. I'm not talking about eviction. We had to relocate people from one point to the other. And it has to be done by the community themselves to create way. With regard to the same, we are working with the civil society organization, just like Koi has said. And a best case study is what we have been doing with either in Kibera and in Mukuru currently. We are doing a mega project because we realize with the data that were collected by Jen Amani Akiba Mashinani, which why Jen was supposed to be here. We are working with Jen Weru, and they have collected data in terms of the GDP that is created in that particular area. And we are saying this is enormous. 70 billion, yeah? 77 billion Kenya shilling is not easy money annually. So we said, okay, so what kind of intervention can we do in Mukuru? So with that kind of information, it has helped the county to step back and say, okay, wait a minute. Perhaps we need to try and help this community do something. And what have we done as a county? In some of this area, we have constructed a number of sanitation facilities, actually with some of the civil society organizations. We have put in lights, security lights, and you'll see most of the floodlights being put in those particular area. I've talked about water. So all these kind of services begin to help people to actually earn their livelihood, because we don't want to destabilize them. We want them, the life to continue. We have also tried as much as possible to put some health facilities in strategic places. And we are working closely with the community health workers to begin addressing areas that the county will not be able to reach. So we have recognized CHWs as one of our key people working in informal settlement, and we have been working with them. So the issue of public-private partnership also is something that we are promoting as a county to try, and because we don't have all the solution, but we know that people living in these places, they have those solutions. So what do we do with them? If they can organize themselves. And this is what we are saying. This is what we are advocating as a county. We advocate for people to get organized. Organize yourself, have your plan, and then bring it to our end, and we will approve it. We have seen Kambimoto is one of the areas just close to Mathare. Kambimoto is in Huruma. Kambimoto, this community is a small community, and perhaps I'll just advocate that before you leave Kenya, for those who are not from Kenya, you try and go to this particular neighborhood, and you will be shocked. It is something that has been done by the neighborhood themselves. They planned the area, they constructed the houses themselves. What did they do? They had their plan, they brought it to the county approved it. Yeah? So that is what we are trying to do in promoting participation and engagement with the local neighborhoods. Another project that has been worked well is in Dandora, Dandora Transformation League. They have done their plans, and they've come to the county, and the county has approved it. So the county is very open to engage with anyone at any given level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Humphrey. It's interesting to hear how much the county council has been doing, and also to hear about the work that you've done with civil society organizations, and that you actually promote community-driven solutions. I must say that I have my skepticism when you talk about water supply, because I don't live in Mathare, but I don't have water. My only task left is to thank my panel. Please join me in thanking a very brilliant panel for the very riveting conversation. And thank you.